Welcome to the PharmaSource podcast. Today we're speaking with Amber Meriwether from Astellas Pharma, who recently transitioned from Director of Procurement for Research to a corporate strategy role. So we're going to talk about her career, including her global experience, 3 years in Tokyo during the pandemic, and her work in managing one of the industry's most diverse portfolios, from small molecules to cell and gene therapy. Amber, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
To start with, could you give us a bit of an overview of your career so far, please? Because I think it's got quite an unconventional sort of journey, perhaps, into strategy, but great to, understand what took you there.
Sure. So my first job ever was as a research assistant in radiation and cellular oncology, doing real-world evidence studies, so large, messy data. That's snowballed over the years to a lot of our site research operations as a university hospital as we kept expanding our footprint and being able to do more research across the region. There was a point in my career after I'd also gone to law school and done a master's in bioethics where I realized there wasn't much opportunity for growth. So I made the transition to pharma. And my first job was in contracting, a familiar place for probably a lot of your listeners. I negotiated a lot on the university side and those complex agreements that were in play. But my role kept evolving to then outsourcing of our medical affairs and late phase research activities as they were globalizing, which created a lot of opportunity to keep growing and learning in new skills.
You're in Chicago at this time?
Yes. I spent the first 10 years of my career or so in the Chicago area. In 2019, we globalized our procurement organization, and as part of that, I went to Japan to lead our R&D procurement organization based there through the transition. This was a big change for our group, and out of all of that, I ended up leading our research procurement organization, which was a bit of a misnomer. It was actually lab equipment, lab supplies, and all of our outsourced drug discovery and preclinical work. And I took on that role in June of 2020. So a pretty intense period in time to take responsibility for those activities, but it was a great opportunity to really be forged in the fire and this organization.
And so you spent that time during the pandemic in Tokyo. What was that experience like for you?
Travel is really about making the foreign familiar and familiar foreign. And so this was a moment I probably wouldn't have had an experience had it not been for COVID. I spent 2.5 years straight in Japan as one of the few people who was non-Japanese because of the border restrictions at the time. It really gave me a deeper understanding of the culture, both in Japan and then my home culture in the United States, and seeing how both respond to such pressures and stress and navigate them.
What was that like then? Those lessons in cultural differences between the perhaps more corporate Japanese culture with San Francisco entrepreneurialism. What were your sort of takeaways or learnings from that time?
So I think it goes broader than that. Over the course of my career at Astellas, I've actually been based at 5 different locations and had the chance to visit 25 different sites over the years. So that includes a regional headquarters in Americas, a global headquarters in Japan, as well as cell therapy, manufacturing, and research locations, a recently acquired biotech, and then our R&D hub. Every single one of them is bringing something different, but they all are latching on to different elements of our culture and essential to what we do. Sometimes it means they have different approaches to formality at its most obvious. What types of messages they read? Do they respond to those only from local leaders? Global leaders? Do they understand the global context of our organization and how we even operate and what we do fully? Those are some of the biggest differences that came through. What level of in-person they respond to as opposed to being able to even connect with them virtually. So those are some of the differences we were seeing.
And what did you find was effective in order to get results?
You had to meet people where they were at and really make sure that you tailored it to that level of understanding and approach. For instance, if you sent global messages, there were groups that would not read them. You have to know that, or else you're not going to be effective and your strategy isn't going to stick.
At that time, Amber, you were covering, as you mentioned, lab equipment, supplies, outsourcing of drug discovery, which is quite a diverse portfolio there. How would you say that it differs from other areas of procurement? What if someone was to step into that sort of role, what would they need to know about to be effective?
I think you need to have a basic understanding of the business. It's incredibly specialized to the pharma and biotech industry.
Hmm.
It's not something you can necessarily make the jump as cleanly into if you've been in other areas and don't have that deep scientific knowledge. You also end up in a lot more manufacturing space as well. So the regulations that come with this are pretty heavy. And we happen to have done a number of brand new site builds as a team. So being able to navigate how do you put up an entire building with a laboratory or manufacturing component becomes really important.
Is there a balance between an appetite for risk and cost savings? The more traditional procurement metrics of cost versus the more scientific experimental approach.
Costs are important. I will say speed, quality, and definitely innovation actually are the top priorities in this space, at least for us.
So fast forward to 2025, Astellas won a Procurement Excellence Award recently, the World Procurement Awards. Why did you win the award?
This was for our strategic outsourcing and relationship operating model that we built for our research organization. This was officially about rationalizing our supply base and driving efficiencies there after a number of acquisitions, but it was really about building the operating model for our research organization.
Hmm.
It was about those foundational relationships, the necessary data infrastructure for that organization, the minimum requirements and common standards, because people were coming from so many different modalities and perspectives and different parts of the world and ideas around what good looked like, and putting in place the necessary supplier relationship management for critical and heavily regulated activities.
To give us an idea of the numbers, I mean, how many suppliers were there before doing this rationalization project? Where were you trying to get to?
So we primarily focused on those that are part of your IND enabling package. So what you need in order to even be able to start human trials. That was probably around 200 or so we could
Hmm.
identify we were starting with, but we were working across 5 financial systems
Okay.
at that moment in time because we had had so many acquisitions in a very quick period.
Hmm.
And we took that down to about 73 that we sent an RFI to as part of the initial screening because we wanted to be very inclusive and what people were asking that we even consider because we didn't know what the answer would be. And we got it down to less than 10.
That's a huge consolidation from 200 to less than 10.
Yes. And we recognize there's specialized cases where it is, again, incredibly cutting edge technology that will need an exception to that, but that core pool is now set.
In terms of the process, then, so you mentioned this like a lack of integrated systems. How would you do that? How would you pull all of that into a single view before you even sent out the RFIs?
Excellent question. This is where my first job in real world evidence and messy data came into play.
Hmm.
Fortunately, I also had an incredible team who loves to work across that. We used the best we had, and it was not about perfect, it was about good enough to have a general direction. And we knew we would ultimately make the decision off the RFP process and the bid defenses. So we just needed to have a general idea on
Mhm.
that.
One of the challenges, I think, on those sorts of rationalization projects can often be bringing the various different teams along with you on that journey because everyone's got their favorite suppliers or their own, special use cases, which makes them and their team individual. How do you do that? Because it's more than just procurement, isn't it? It touches so many different parts of the org.
Yes, I think this is really more about change management and how do you lead this type of transformation.
Hmm.
And for us, it was about making sure we brought people together and fostered common understanding in order to actually make this decision stick long term.
Hmm.
So we had representatives from every single modality we were operating across. So cell therapy, gene therapy, small molecule, large molecule, various indications we play in around, say, oncology, ophthalmology, and people from every single one of our research sites around the world, whether or not they're from our historic organization in Japan or from San Francisco, Boston, one of the more recently acquired parts.
Hmm.
And by doing that, it was about them coming together for the first time with intentionality to be able to have that understanding. So we literally had our first design meeting in Japan because we knew most people had never been there. They didn't understand our organization and what they were actually stepping into. And from there, when we did working sessions, we knew our Japanese organization had never seen what it was to work without infrastructure like we had there. So
Mm.
we took them to one of our biotechs in Boston for some of the working sessions so they could see we had to make this simple and easy to follow because there was no support on site. And then when it came time to actually make a decision, we intentionally put it in our brand new built facility for our bid defense. In San Francisco. And that way it was a space that was already opening at that moment as a brand new organization and coming together to take our first decision as a group.
Great, great. And what would you do in those rollout events? How would you engage everyone who was there?
So this was just even in the process of getting to a decision, not even the rollout to our whole organization.
Mm.
This was about creating change agents. But it was partly sharing knowledge because we had a very technical group of people and we needed to drive towards decisions. But it was also about creating space where they could learn from each other and connect and then help them in the next phases of their career. And you can see the relationships have actually lasted and they now have contacts around the world.
Mm.
So it would be warm icebreaker activities, things like that, but it would also have that technical knowledge sharing that they love and engaged with.
Mm. Great. How do you measure the impact? What were the KPIs around a project like this? Rationalization and the number of suppliers would be one, but presumably there would be a revenue impact or a speed impact. How do you measure that?
Cost savings,
Mhm.
obviously, we are a procurement organization, that it was top of the list. But cycle times, so quote to PO, being able to go faster on
Mm.
that. We are looking at the supply base and monitoring that long term. Is this meeting our needs? Are we awarding work to these suppliers? Are there exceptions coming through? And then also monitoring the minimum standards and common requirements actually that we developed. So this was about our research overall and
Mm.
our people following that.
And how did you roll it out wider across the org?
So when we rolled out our operating model to the broader organization, we literally and figuratively met people where they were at. We
Mm.
made a point actually of going to every single site around the world and having events. We knew that for this population, a virtual training was not going to be something that would stick long term
Mhm.
and that we needed to make it fun and engaging in order to be memorable. They would know where the resources were, but we wanted them to have fun and connect with each other. So we developed a series of games and activities that covered the core principles of what we were trying to teach and what the resources were and brought people together that way. And it culminated in the teams that were formed throughout of that. The final two needing to go find pieces of a water rocket
Okay.
and then literally launching them to see who could do it first while being cheered on by all of their colleagues.
They had to make the water rocket.
Yes. And the winners got trophies that they could put on their desk as a physical reminder of what they did that day, but then also be a talking point for their colleagues when they walk by and say, hey, what was that? And
Mm.
remember what the project was and that maybe they should be following something there.
Yeah, yeah,
And we
that's
followed it
great.
up with a happy hour. So there was that informal space for connection and community, but also asking questions.
Mm.
And then literally the next day we would do coffee chats where we would have breakfast and coffee and people could informally ask questions. And we got a completely different crowd of people who would come and engage that way.
Mm.
Or people who had thought about it a little bit more and wanted to talk more the next day.
Very
That way
interesting.
we were able to better connect and we tailored every time to the local environment. So there were nuances from a cultural standpoint that we started to build in, as well as some of the local site logistics operations.
Interesting. And did you have to deal with any negativity as part of that as well?
I think people were excited. They
Mm.
could knew something was coming, um, and they wanted to be part of it. And they also just wanted some team building and connection with their colleagues in a way that was not always there. People obviously challenged why was my supplier not on the final list?
Hmm.
And how do I work with my favorite supplier? But because we had gone so broad in the RFI process, we were able to actually respond with facts and data as to why. Maybe your supplier did not actually meet the standards we need for the FDA based on what they shared with
Mm.
us. Maybe they chose not to participate because they could see this might be a different way of working than that wasn't what they wanted to be on the journey for.
One of the strategies which many pharma companies seem to be using is e-marketplaces, particularly when it's the R&D side of things, to give the scientists the flexibility to be able to choose what they need from a wide range. What are your thoughts on e-marketplaces and how do they play a role in this?
I think for a research part of an organization, this is core business in the pharma industry. It needs speed, and science is rapidly evolving, and they need to be able to access innovative providers. So I think e-marketplaces are a great way to build compliance and also the necessary data structures for visibility, while enhancing speed. Because otherwise, you're not going to necessarily get through the due diligence processes that are required for a lot of these in an efficient way. And when it's quite burdensome from the suppliers as well when we talk about due diligence, because
Hmm.
many of them are small and they don't have the ability to respond to the scale of what a big pharma might require.
I suppose that's the beauty of the marketplaces, that they've already gone through those processes, they've signed up to some standard terms and conditions.
Yes, they've gone through it once, and that's the standard we hold them to as an industry.
Looking a bit broader, how would you see the role of technology when it comes to procurement and to supplier relationships? How do you think about the use of AI and digital platforms? Because there's so many of them right now. It seems like every day there's a different procure tech startup. How do you think about that, Amber? And how do you make decisions on which ones are actually going to make the boat move faster?
So I think in general, we're in the midst of a bit of an industrial revolution. That being said, I think it will take a bit more time than is currently hyped, but we can all clearly see that we're at this inflection point and sort of
Hmm.
have an idea of what's about to come. So I think we need to be mindful in any approach that we take. So it's making sure that as we do it, that we actually, before you pick any technology, structure your processes in a way where you can identify what can be automated and set it up for success versus what actually requires a human.
Hmm.
And from there, having that point where you're rolling out the tech in parallel, and then thinking about after that what you need as far as people and the capabilities to support around it.
Yeah.
This is an area that requires a lot more thought and pre-work, I think, than selection of any technology. You need to know what you want and need before you pick the tech.
Mm-mm.
As far as vetting those, I think there's a lot of questions to be asked, and I think you've got digital people who are much better at that than I am.
What's the Astellas approach? Do you have like a core procurement operations team or like a digital team who would roll out these types of technologies?
So for us, we are category aligned. So we do have a digital procurement team that
Hmm.
supports pretty broadly. In addition to obviously having a procurement excellence team that partners on whatever the specific needs for our business unit are. There's also a reskilling component here.
Okay.
I think a lot of procurement professionals have focused heavily on the data and analysis, but as technology evolves, the skills of procurement are going to need to evolve to match with it.
Hmm.
And as I said, it will take time for some of this to roll out because many people are working in companies with legacy systems, but there's a need to be self-driven and proactive in that and identify those areas where they will withstand a lot of technological transformation.
What kind of areas are they?
I see things like category management and leading transformation and change still standing because those are very human and driven as well as very nuance driven in a way that doesn't lead to straightforward analysis.
Mhm.
So some of the major areas where I see, but other parts where we have a lot of that procurement operations and data integration, those are things that are well suited potentially to change.
Great. Let's talk then about your new role. Since January, you've obviously moved into this new world of corporate strategy. Really interesting to hear about how your procurement background has informed going into broader strategic planning when you're dealing with patent cliffs and pipeline development and what the future of the business overall will look like. How's that transition been for you?
Yeah, I think procurement brings more to strategy than is usually recognized.
Hmm.
Um, we have an understanding in procurement of our end-to-end business and our operations because of where we sit and the fact that we often are category aligned looking across the entire business.
Mhm.
It's financial analysis and insights generation that is so important to understanding where you're going and what your needs are. It's the change management and initiative leadership that we've been talking about, and the internal and external understanding of the environment that procurement is actually deeply versed in on a daily basis because we are making those adjustments and monitoring what's going on out in the world to be able to better partner internally and help deliver and meet our objectives as a company.
How would you say your priorities have changed? I mean, what are those sort of, the challenges, the things which are keeping you up at night at the moment?
Good question. So I think we have a lot going on in the external environment between needing to make sure we have resilient supply chains.
Hmm.
How do we navigate geopolitical resetting and transition that's happening right now? I think there's a lot going on in our industry around patent cliffs, which will take out about 59 billion by 2030, and
Hmm.
that changes how everybody responds in the environment. And I think there's a lot to go on out externally, but everyone always want to make sure you have it set up perfect in your company as well.
Digging in a bit more into each of those, geopolitical tensions, discussions around reshoring and supply chain resilience. Would you say that's now a board level priority rather than being something which is dealt with just within supply chain team? How much of that is a key priority?
I think this is a priority for any company. We need resilience, not just across supply chain, but across your entire global operation
Hmm.
at this point, in order to make sure that you're well positioned to navigate how the world evolves.
Every day when I turn on the news, something else has changed. How do you try and navigate that in a strategic way? I mean, is scenario planning part of that? I mean, are there any models that you sort of would turn to?
I think scenario planning is a core capability, particularly within corporate strategy function, but within many companies and your risk and resilience teams.
Hmm.
And I think that really is. And then making sure you have those clear decision points as an organization or points that where you're monitoring for inflection to be able to make decisions in a timely fashion.
On the other area there that you mentioned around the patent cliff, what's the strategic response for that? Is it to go out to market and try to identify what are going to be the next up and coming therapeutics in the pipeline? And where do you look for that? I mean, something that we've talked about before is how China has 1.5 million patents versus the US is zero point 0.5 million, for example. I mean, are you looking at it with a geographically agnostic lens?
I think this is going to depend for every company how they approach this question and what they have in their own internal pipeline versus what they might approach externally. To your question about China, I think,
Hmm.
again, this is going to vary by each company, but we're at a point of inflection where China's always has been growing for my entire life and continuing to advance. And a lot of what's going on. As you said, they have 1.5 million patents in the last year. The US was number two at 500,000.
Hmm.
And the top five countries after China still can't equal what they've been producing. Uh, they've also had as many clinical trial starts as the US almost in the last year. So they're very well positioned as an innovation hub. And I think people need to be thoughtful around how they navigate, say, the US, China, Europe, and any other major geopolitical
Hmm.
considerations as they engage across this.
Any
It comes
any
with pros
tip
and cons.
any tips you could share? Because I think definitely a big.
No, no, I think it's a hard question, and I think everyone's trying to figure out the best answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Finally, I wonder if there's any advice you could share for other procurement professionals who might want to follow a similar career path or, expand into a more strategic role in future. What advice could you share?
I think that's really understand your company's strategy
Hmm.
and identify opportunities where you can help make it happen. It's really, there are many skills in procurement that you can bring to helping address those. And it's how do you leverage those while broadening your exposure and make it happen. Actually deliver in a positive way that is visible and can help drive your organization forward.
So not being, the traditional cost-obsessed procurement stereotype, perhaps, and being much more that strategic business partner.
Yes, you can deliver financial value. The company obviously needs that, but it's how do you do that and more
Hmm.
in a way that aligns with their overall objectives.
Amber, thank you so much for your time today. Pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you, Luke. Wonderful to be here.